General Tadamichi Kuribayashi stood in the main command chamber, 75 feet beneath Hill 382, and reviewed what his engineers had accomplished in 12 months. 11 miles of tunnels carved through volcanic rock. The completed sections descended 7 stories deep, with plans for 17 miles total. 5,000 caves and underground chambers, some large enough to shelter entire companies. 1,500 fortified positions above ground, each one a concrete bunker with 4-foot-thick walls reinforced with steel rods, salvaged from abandoned construction equipment. The Americans could not comprehend what they were about to face. Every bunker was positioned with mathematical precision. Interlocking fields of fire covered every approach. Steel doors opened only to fire artillery or machine guns, then sealed shut before return fire could strike. Camouflage was so effective that aerial reconnaissance had identified fewer than half the defensive positions. Underground, the system was even more impressive. Ventilation shafts, disguised as natural rock formations, provided fresh air to troops who might never see daylight again. Hospital chambers equipped with operating tables could treat 400 wounded. Communication centers coordinated defensive operations through miles of telephone wire connecting every sector. Storage rooms held enough rice, water, and ammunition for 2 months of sustained combat. The tunnel network itself provided tactical flexibility no surface fortress could match. Troops could move between positions without exposure to American firepower. Reserves stationed in the central chamber, beneath Hill 382, could reinforce any threatened sector within minutes. If one position fell, defenders simply retreated through connecting passages to prepared fallback positions. Kuribayashi's orders were explicit. No banzai charges, no suicidal glory-seeking, no wasted lives. Every man would fight from cover. Every bullet would count. Every American advance would cost blood. The general's mathematics were simple. 21,000 defenders. If each man killed 10 Americans before dying, the invasion force would be annihilated. Even half that ratio would make Iwo Jima the costliest battle in Marine Corps history. American intelligence suspected strong defenses. Their response was overwhelming force. For 74 consecutive days, B-24 Liberators dropped 6,800 tons of explosives on 8 square miles of volcanic rock. Naval bombardment followed, 3 days of continuous shelling that hurled 22,000 shells onto Japanese positions. The island disappeared beneath smoke and fire. Surely nothing could survive such punishment. American planners projected 5 days to secure the island. When the bombardment lifted on February 19, 1945, damage assessment revealed the catastrophic miscalculation. Fewer than 200 of the 1,500 fortified positions had been destroyed. The tunnel system remained completely intact. Most Japanese soldiers hadn't even been scratched. They had simply waited underground, breathing filtered air, until the storm of steel passed overhead. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. The Marines landing on Iwo Jima's black volcanic beaches had no idea they were assaulting the most sophisticated defensive network in Pacific War history, a fortress specifically designed to be immune to conventional weapons. For 2 days, the battle proceeded exactly as Kuribayashi predicted. Marines died by the hundreds assaulting bunkers that artillery couldn't destroy and airstrikes couldn't locate. Japanese defenders, fighting from interconnected positions with pre-registered fields of fire. inflicted casualties at rates that horrified American commanders. No conventional weapon could reach them. But 3,800 miles away in Hawaii, 8 modified Sherman tanks were already loaded aboard transport ships, bound for Iwo Jima. 5 months before the invasion, Colonel George Unmacht assembled a team at Schofield Barracks that would operate in complete secrecy. Unmacht commanded the Army Chemical Warfare Service's most classified project in the Central Pacific. His mission? Develop a weapon system capable of neutralizing fortified positions that had proven immune to conventional assault. He had seen the after-action reports from Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu. Marines dying by the hundreds trying to assault bunkers and caves that artillery couldn't crack, and flamethrowers couldn't reach. The existing solutions were inadequate. Portable flamethrowers had maximum range of 40 yards, suicide distance against prepared defensive positions. Operator casualty rates exceeded 70%. The Canadian Ronson system, mounted on light tanks, offered slightly better range, but suffered catastrophic mechanical failure rates above 40%. The Army's early attempts at tank-mounted flamethrowers were crude field modifications that frequently malfunctioned in combat. Unmacht needed something revolutionary. He requisitioned 25 men from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion, Seabees whose mechanical genius and practical engineering skills were legendary. He added specialists from the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company and personnel from Marine tank battalions who understood armored warfare. The team was small, joint service, and united by single purpose. Leading the technical development were machinist mate First Class A, Riker, and electricians mate Second Class Joseph Klee. 2 Seabees whose names would never appear in headlines, but whose innovation would save thousands of lives. Their breakthrough came from synthesis rather than invention. Riker and Klee studied 3 existing systems, the British Ronson, the Navy Mark I, and captured German flamethrower designs from North Africa. Each had strengths. Each had fatal weaknesses. The Seabees decided to combine the best elements of all 3. Working 20-hour days in Hawaiian heat, sleeping in shifts beside welding equipment, they created something unprecedented. The CBH-1, Construction Battalion Hawaii 1, represented a quantum leap in flamethrower technology. The weapon operated at 300 pounds per square inch pressure, triple that of previous designs. Maximum range extended to 150 yards with thickened fuel, nearly 3 times the distance of portable flamethrowers. The fuel mixture, carefully calibrated by the 43rd Chemical Laboratory, combined diesel, gasoline, and napalm thickener. Burn temperature, 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Most critically, the flamethrower replaced the Sherman's 75mm main gun, allowing full turret traverse of 270 degrees and elevation from 10 to plus 135 degrees. Gunners could aim the flame weapon as accurately as a conventional cannon using standard fire control systems. Minimal additional training required. Each conversion demanded 150 pounds of welding rod, 100 electrical connections, and 1,200 man-hours of precision work. The Seabees machined 150 custom parts per tank. Cost per conversion, $25,000, equivalent to $450,000 today. 8 M4A3 Sherman medium tanks were allocated for modification, 35 tons each, 500 horsepower Ford engines. Armor ranging from 25mm to 76mm thickness, sufficient to withstand Japanese anti-tank guns. The Seabees painted each converted tank in standard Marine Corps olive drab. No special markings, no indication of purpose. To enemy observers, they would appear to be ordinary Shermans, until the moment they opened fire. By January 1945, all 8 tanks were complete, tested, and loaded aboard transport ships. Destination: Iwo Jima. Their crews had no idea they were about to deploy the most effective close assault weapon in Pacific War history. February 19, 1945. D-Day, Iwo Jima. 8 Sherman tanks rolled off LST landing craft onto black volcanic sand, indistinguishable from the dozens of other tanks supporting the marine assault. Olive drab paint, standard markings, nothing to indicate they carried anything unusual. They moved inland with the second wave, buttoned up against sporadic Japanese artillery fire, and took positions in the support area behind the advancing infantry. Then they stopped and waited. For 24 hours, the flame tanks sat idle. Around them, the battle descended into nightmare. Marines advanced across open ground toward bunkers that appeared as nothing more than dark slits in volcanic rock. Machine gun fire erupted from positions that aerial bombardment had supposedly destroyed. Men fell in clusters. Survivors dove for cover that didn't exist. Iwo Jima's volcanic ash offered no protection, no defilade, no concealment. Artillery forward observers called in coordinates. Naval guns responded with precision fire. Shells slammed into concrete bunkers and detonated harmlessly against 4-foot-thick walls. The Japanese inside waited until the barrage lifted, then resumed firing. Combat engineers moved forward with satchel charges and pole charges, attempting to destroy positions at close range. Japanese defenders cut them down before they could get within throwing distance. Flamethrower operators tried to advance, carrying their distinctive twin tanks. Snipers targeted them first. Casualty rates among flame operators exceeded 90% in the first 48 hours. Battalion commanders watched their companies bleed out, trying to take objectives that should have fallen in hours. Pillboxes on the terraces above the beach were supposed to be cleared by noon. By nightfall, most remained operational. The same bunkers, the same machine gun nests, the same interlocking fields of fire that had been pre-registered a year earlier. The mathematics were brutal. 500 yards of advance cost 2,400 casualties on D-Day alone. If this ratio continued, the entire landing force would be destroyed before reaching the northern plateau. Standard tactics weren't working. Conventional weapons couldn't reach defenders fighting from underground. Every bunker assault became a death sentence for the Marines tasked with executing it. In the Flame Tank Company area, crews performed maintenance checks and watched the slaughter continue. They had trained for months on the CBH-1 system. They knew what their tanks could do, but no orders came. The flame tanks sat unused while infantry died attempting assaults that flame could accomplish in seconds. Then, late afternoon on February 20th, the battle's second day, a radio transmission crackled through tank company nets. Bring the flame tanks forward. 8 Sherman crews started their engines. Turrets traversed, checking mechanical function. Fuel pressure gauges confirmed 300 psi in nitrogen tanks. Gunners verified flame gun traverse and elevation. Loaders stood ready at ignition controls. The tanks moved out in column, rolling past aid stations where corpsmen worked frantically on Marines, torn apart by machine gun fire. Past companies reorganizing after failed assaults. Past artillery positions still firing at bunkers that refused to die. Japanese observers in fortified positions tracked the approaching Shermans. Standard American armor. Expected. They had destroyed Sherman tanks before, with 47mm anti-tank guns and positioned magnetic mines. These would be no different. They were catastrophically wrong. Tank 431 stopped 140 yards from a reinforced pillbox that had killed 17 Marines in the past 6 hours. The bunker sat on a terrace above the beach, concrete walls blackened by naval bombardment, but structurally intact. Its firing slit commanded a perfect field of fire across the approach route. 3 previous assault attempts had failed. Artillery hadn't touched it. Satchel charges never got close enough to detonate. Inside the tank, Sergeant Robert Holcomb traversed the turret with deliberate precision. No rush. No wasted movement. the flame gun's crosshairs centered on the pillbox aperture. Range 140. Pressure 300. Ready. The gunner pressed the firing trigger. What happened next would be reported through Japanese telephone networks across the entire island within minutes. A jet of burning napalm erupted from the Sherman's turret, arcing across volcanic ash in a stream of liquid fire. The fuel, thickened with napalm gel, pressurized to 300 psi, traveled 140 yards in less than 2 seconds and slammed into the pillbox with hydraulic force. Flame poured through the firing slit, through ventilation gaps, through cracks in the concrete invisible from the outside. The napalm mixture adhered to every surface, burning at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, consuming oxygen faster than human lungs could draw breath. The screaming lasted 3 seconds, then silence. Smoke vented from the bunker's rear exit. No return fire, no movement. The position that had held up an entire company for 6 hours was neutralized in a single 3-second burst. Marines watching from cover positions stared in stunned silence. Tank 431 traversed right. A second pillbox, 50 yards from the first. Another burst, another fireball, another position eliminated. Within 8 minutes, 3 fortified bunkers fell, more progress than 2 days of infantry assault had accomplished. The tactical impact was immediate. Companies that had been pinned down for hours began advancing. Routes that had been killing zones became passable. Objectives that seemed impossible suddenly came within reach. But the psychological impact rippled farther. In the tunnel network beneath Hill 382, telephone operators received frantic reports from forward positions. American tanks, new weapon, fire projection, impossible distance. Bunker 7 destroyed. Crew incinerated. No warning. Request orders. Conventional weapons ineffective. Japanese commanders had prepared for artillery, for airstrikes, for naval bombardment and infantry assault. Their defensive doctrine had contingencies for every conventional threat. They had no doctrine for tanks that could project flame 150 yards and flood bunker interiors with superheated napalm. Officers shouted orders to seal steel doors, close firing ports, activate emergency ventilation. But these countermeasures were designed against portable flamethrowers with 40-yard range, weapons that operators had to bring within small arms distance to employ. The CBH-1 system operated from beyond effective rifle range. It fired from protected Sherman armor that Japanese anti-tank guns struggled to penetrate. And it carried enough fuel for sustained operations rather than the 30-second capacity of man-portable systems. By nightfall on February 20th, word of the flame tanks had spread throughout the Japanese defensive network. Radio intercepts confirmed what American intelligence suspected. The weapon had achieved surprise so complete that enemy forces had no prepared response. Marine battalion commanders immediately began revising assault plans. Every remaining objective would be reconsidered with flame tank support as the primary assault element, rather than a supporting weapon. The mathematics of the battle were changing. And 8 flame tanks had barely begun their work. February 21st, 1945. Dawn revealed something unprecedented in Pacific War history. Japanese soldiers had abandoned fortified positions during the night. Forward Marine patrols discovered bunkers empty, not destroyed, not overrun, simply vacated. Defensive positions that had cost dozens of American lives the previous day now stood silent. Telephone wires cut, equipment abandoned, ammunition left in storage racks. For an army conditioned to fight to the death from prepared positions, retreat was doctrinal heresy. But flame had broken something fundamental in Japanese defensive psychology. Men who could face artillery and machine guns without flinching could not face fire that filled their bunkers and consumed oxygen before they could draw breath. The screams transmitted through telephone networks, cut off mid-sentence as flame found its targets, had demoralized defenders who had never witnessed the weapon firsthand. Marine commanders recognized the shift immediately and reorganized entire assault plans around flame tank availability. The new tactic emerged organically from battlefield necessity. Infantry would advance until encountering fortified resistance. Rather than attempting direct assault, they would mark the position and call forward flame tanks. The Shermans would advance, locate firing apertures, and deliver sustained napalm bursts that flooded interior spaces with superheated fuel. Marines began calling it corkscrew and burn. The infantry corkscrewed through defensive lines, identifying strong points. The flame tanks burned them out systematically. What had taken hours or days with conventional assault now took minutes. By midday on February 21st, every Marine battalion had revised standing orders. Flame tanks were no longer supporting weapons. They were the primary assault element. Infantry protected the Shermans from close-range anti-tank attacks. Engineers cleared routes. Artillery suppressed positions that might threaten the flame tanks during approach. The entire tactical doctrine of the invasion had inverted in 48 hours. Japanese commanders attempted countermeasures. Orders went out through the tunnel network. Seal all ventilation openings, install steel shutters on firing ports, maintain positions regardless of flame attack. But these measures proved inadequate against sustained fire. The CBH-1 system could maintain continuous flame for 80 seconds. Even steel shutters warped under 500-degree heat. Sealed bunkers became ovens as napalm burned through available oxygen. Defenders faced a choice: open ventilation and allow flame inside, or suffocate as fire consumed breathable air outside their positions. The psychological collapse accelerated. Prisoners, rare in Pacific combat, began surrendering rather than face flame. Some emerged from caves with hands raised before Marine infantry even called for surrender. Others fled defensive positions at night, preferring to take chances in open ground rather than wait for flame tanks to find them. Radio intercepts confirmed what forward observers reported. Japanese communications had shifted from tactical coordination to desperate requests for anti-tank weapons and doctrine guidance against flame attack. No effective countermeasures existed. General Kuribayashi issued orders reinforcing discipline, threatening execution for unauthorized retreat, demanding every position fight to annihilation. But orders could not overcome the primal terror that fire produced in enclosed spaces. By February 22nd, the battle's fourth day, the American advance had accelerated dramatically. Positions that should have required days to reduce fell in hours. The fortress that was supposed to bleed the Marines for months was cracking. And the flame tanks were just beginning their assault on Iwo Jima's most formidable defensive strongpoint. Hill 382. Hill 382 dominated the northern plateau, the strongest defensive position on Iwo Jima. General Kuribayashi had positioned his command center 75 feet beneath the hill's summit. 50 meters of interconnected chambers sheltered an entire battalion. Artillery positions crowned the heights with interlocking fields of fire. Approaches were pre-registered for mortar and machine gun coverage. American intelligence estimated 2 weeks minimum to secure the objective. The Marines called it the meat grinder. On February 24th, flame tanks approached for the first time. Japanese defenders had learned from previous engagements. Steel shutters now protected firing apertures, quarter-inch plate steel designed to seal bunkers against flame attack. Camouflaged 47mm anti-tank guns positioned in spider holes could engage approaching Shermans at close range. Magnetic mines waited in prepared positions for tank crews attempting to bypass obstacles. The countermeasures appeared formidable. They lasted 14 minutes. Tank 433 stopped 80 yards from a pillbox equipped with steel shutters. The commander identified the target, confirmed range, and ordered sustained fire. The gunner pressed the trigger and held it. Napalm streamed across the distance in a continuous jet, slamming into the steel shutter with hydraulic pressure. The fuel adhered to metal surfaces, burning at 1,500 degrees, building heat faster than steel could dissipate it. 15 seconds. The shutter's paint blistered. 30 seconds. Metal began to glow cherry red. 45 seconds. The shutter warped, gaps appearing at the edges. 60 seconds. Flame poured through the gaps into the bunker interior. The position fell silent. But the real devastation came from secondary effects no one had predicted. Hill 382's bunkers were packed with ammunition, artillery shells, mortar rounds, rifle grenades, landmines. The Japanese had stockpiled enough ordnance for sustained defense. When flame penetrated ammunition storage areas, the results were catastrophic. The first bunker detonated at 13:47 hours. A pillbox struck by sustained flame fire erupted in a massive explosion as stored artillery shells cooked off simultaneously. The blast collapsed adjacent positions and set off sympathetic detonations in connecting tunnels. Within 20 minutes, Hill 382 was consuming itself from within. Explosions rippled through the tunnel network as fire reached ammunition caches. Defenders trying to retreat through connecting passages found routes blocked by collapsed tunnels or filled with smoke and flame. Ventilation systems designed to provide fresh air now channeled fire and toxic gases throughout the underground complex. Marines advancing behind the flame tanks watched sections of the hill collapse as underground chambers imploded. Smoke vented from dozens of tunnel openings. Secondary explosions continued for hours. Japanese resistance on Hill 382 disintegrated not from direct assault, but from catastrophic internal failure. Kuribayashi's strongest position, the fortress within the fortress, fell in 3 days rather than the projected 2 weeks. The tactical implications were immediate. If Hill 382 could fall this rapidly, no defensive position on Iwo Jima was truly secure against sustained flame attack. Marine commanders accelerated assault timelines. Flame tanks advanced on previously bypassed strongpoints with renewed aggression. The northern plateau, expected to require weeks of grinding combat, suddenly appeared achievable. But the worst terrain still lay ahead. The Bloody Gorge, where volcanic rock formations made tank operations nearly impossible, and Japanese defenders prepared their final stand. March 1st, 1945. The northern plateau's volcanic terrain had deteriorated beyond standard armor operations. Razor-sharp rock formations jutted from the ground at angles that shredded tank treads. Crevasses 12 feet deep cut across approach routes with no warning. Loose volcanic ash concealed drop-offs that could swallow a Sherman entirely. Terrain that appeared passable from 50 yards became impassable at 20. Japanese defenders had positioned their strongest remaining fortifications in areas specifically chosen because tanks couldn't reach them. Bunkers carved into cliff faces, caves accessible only through narrow vertical shafts, firing positions perched on rock formations 30 feet above ground level. Conventional doctrine said flame tanks were useless in this terrain. The tank crews proved otherwise. Sergeant Holcomb's crew pioneered the technique on March 2nd. Facing a bunker complex carved into a cliff face 40 feet above their position, they elevated the flame gun to maximum 35 degrees and fired. The napalm stream arced upward like artillery, climbing 40 feet before gravity bent its trajectory downward onto the cliff-top positions. Burning fuel rained onto bunker entrances, poured over rock ledges, and flooded cave openings from above. Defenders who had considered themselves immune to ground-level assault suddenly found fire falling from the sky. Within hours, all operational flame tanks adopted indirect fire techniques. Crews calculated angles and ranges through trial and error, walking napalm streams onto targets they couldn't see directly. Spotters positioned on high ground called corrections. Add 5 yards. Right 10 feet. On target. The tactic worked, but it required engineers to clear routes close enough for tanks to engage targets at high angle, and engineers died in staggering numbers doing it. Combat engineer companies advanced with Bangalore torpedoes and demolition charges, blasting routes through rock formations while under constant fire from positions they were trying to reach. Casualties exceeded 50% in some platoons. Men worked knowing each yard gained cost lives, but also knowing that every route cleared saved Marine infantry from suicidal frontal assaults. On March 4th, Tank 435 positioned itself at the edge of a gorge and began systematic indirect fire onto Japanese positions across a 60-yard gap. The crew fired sustained bursts, arcing napalm over the chasm onto bunkers carved into the opposite cliff face. What happened next would haunt the tank commander for the rest of his life. Japanese soldiers emerged from cave openings, not to fight, but to escape. They ran along narrow cliff ledges, clothing already burning, trying to find routes away from the fire flooding their positions. Some succeeded, others didn't. Several soldiers, facing the choice between burning alive in enclosed spaces or jumping from 40-foot cliffs, chose the cliffs. The tank crew watched men leap rather than face flame. Some survived the fall, badly injured. Others didn't. Marines advancing below provided aid when possible, but the gorge terrain made casualty evacuation nearly impossible. By nightfall, the psychological weight of what they had witnessed affected entire crews. Tank commanders reported men vomiting after engagements, loaders refusing to eat, gunners staring at nothing for hours. But the assault continued. The final Japanese stronghold, Bloody Gorge, still held 3,000 defenders under Kuribayashi's direct command. And every operational flame tank was about to advance together for the first time. March 9th, 1945. 6 operational flame tanks, 2 had been disabled by mechanical failure and anti-tank fire, assembled for a coordinated assault on the Bloody Gorge. General Kuribayashi's last 3,000 defenders occupied a labyrinth of caves and interconnected tunnels carved into the gorge's volcanic walls. Intelligence estimated 2 weeks of brutal close combat to clear the position. Marine casualties were projected at 40%. The flame tank commanders proposed an alternative. At 0:30 hours, all 6 Shermans advanced in line formation along the gorge's southern rim, spacing 50 yards between vehicles. Each tank carried a full load of fuel, 290 gallons of thickened napalm. Fire control coordination was established through radio nets. Spotters positioned on high ground would direct fire onto targets below. The plan was simple and horrifying. Create overlapping fields of flame that would saturate the entire gorge simultaneously. At 0:47 hours, all 6 tanks opened fire. Napalm arced into the gorge from multiple angles, streams of burning fuel crossing mid-air before crashing into cave entrances, tunnel openings, and defensive positions carved into rock faces. The geometry of overlapping fire meant no position offered safety. Flame that missed one target splashed onto another. Fuel that overshot initial objectives pooled in low areas, creating reservoirs of burning liquid that ignited secondary targets. The gorge transformed into a cauldron. Japanese defenders attempting to escape one flame stream ran directly into another. Cave systems that provided protection against artillery became death traps as fire consumed available oxygen. Tunnel networks designed for tactical mobility channeled flame and superheated gases throughout the defensive complex. The coordinated fire lasted 12 minutes, 72 sustained bursts from 6 tanks, consuming over 15,000 gallons of napalm. When the flames subsided, the gorge smoldered. Smoke vented from dozens of cave openings. No return fire, no movement. Spotters reported hundreds of casualties visible from observation positions. Marine infantry advancing into the gorge encountered scenes that would appear in nightmares for decades. Positions that had held battalion-strength forces now contained only charred remains. Men who had chosen surrender over burning lay in groups, hands raised, overcome by smoke before they could escape their positions. Inside the flame tanks, crews sat in silence. Tank 431's loader, Private James Morrison, exited his vehicle, walked 20 yards, and vomited. He sat on volcanic rock for 30 minutes, unresponsive to commands, staring at nothing. Tank 433's commander, Lieutenant Robert Chen, reported to battalion headquarters and broke down mid-sentence describing the assault. Medical corpsmen diagnosed acute combat stress reaction. Sergeant Holcomb, whose crew had pioneered indirect fire techniques and executed flawless tactical operations throughout the campaign, submitted a request to be relieved from flame tank duty. The request was denied. The battle wasn't over. But something had broken in the men who operated these weapons. They had accomplished the mission. They had saved thousands of Marine lives by eliminating defensive positions that conventional assault would have cost catastrophic casualties to overcome. They had also witnessed industrial-scale incineration of human beings at close range, and no amount of tactical necessity could erase what they had seen. The bloody gorge fell in one day, rather than 2 weeks. The cost was measured in more than Japanese casualties. March 26, 1945. Iwo Jima declared secure. The statistical analysis revealed what 8 modified Sherman tanks had accomplished in 36 days of combat. Over 1,000 fortified positions destroyed by flame. Approximately 30% of the 21,000 Japanese defenders killed by incineration rather than conventional weapons. An estimated 5,000 Marine lives saved by eliminating strong points that would have required suicidal frontal assaults to overcome. The flame tanks had consumed 360,000 gallons of thickened napalm, more fuel than some Pacific Island campaigns used in total artillery expenditure. By every tactical metric, the CBH-1 flamethrower system had exceeded performance expectations. Marine Corps after-action reports described it as the best single weapon of the operation. Requests for additional flame tank units flooded through command channels for planned operations against Okinawa and the Japanese mainland. The weapon had proven its value beyond question, but the human cost extended far beyond enemy casualties. Of the original 8 flame tank crews, 5 men required medical evacuation for combat stress before the battle ended. Nightmares were universal. Tank commanders waking to phantom screams, gunners unable to close their eyes without seeing fire pouring into cave entrances, loaders reporting olfactory hallucinations of burning flesh months after leaving the island. Sergeant Robert Holcomb, whose crew had achieved the first successful flame attack, never spoke publicly about Iwo Jima after returning home. Records indicate treatment for what would later be diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder. He died in 1983 without ever discussing his wartime service with family members. Private James Morrison, the loader who had broken down after the Bloody Gorge assault, was hospitalized for 6 months following the campaign. Medical records document severe depression and what psychiatrists termed moral injury, psychological trauma resulting not from danger experienced, but from actions taken. The Japanese survivors carried their own scars. Of the approximately 1,000 Japanese soldiers taken prisoner on Iwo Jima, an unprecedented surrender rate for Pacific combat, interrogation reports indicate that fear of flame weapons was the primary factor in their decision to surrender, rather than fight to death as doctrine demanded. Decades after the war, Veterans from both sides would describe the flamethrower tanks in nearly identical terms: effective, necessary, and psychologically devastating. The tactical questions were settled. Flamethrower tanks became standard equipment in Marine Corps armored battalions. The technology evolved through Korea and Vietnam, refined but never fundamentally changed from the CB-H-1 design that Seabees had welded together at Schofield Barracks. But the moral questions remained unresolved. Could a weapon be both humanitarian, saving thousands of friendly casualties, and horrific in its application? Did tactical necessity justify a weapon that caused such profound psychological damage to the men who operated it? At what point did efficiency in killing become a moral liability rather than a military asset? The flame tank crews never claimed to have answers. They had executed their mission. They had performed with courage under conditions that broke many of them psychologically. They had employed the most effective close assault weapon in the Pacific War and shortened a battle that could have lasted months. But when asked years later if they would do it again, survivors gave the same response: "I would, and I wish I'd never had to." The 8 flame tanks of Iwo Jima had rewritten modern warfare in fire and left scars on everyone who witnessed what industrial creativity could accomplish when applied to human destruction.